We are live. Welcome, everybody, to our book study here in the JL Success Mastermind for Monday, the 21st of September. Oh, I think I just sent this live public. Okay, well, it was going to be a freebie for some people. So thanks for tuning in. Of course, we got a few of my favorite people here. I see Ace, man. Good to see you, brother.
How you
And
doing?
Adrienne Ivier, who doesn't sleep. Lindsay, good to see Janet, of course. Glenn's here. Stuart, Glenn's not in the pub. He's home. He's doing his Vulcan thing. Wayne, good to see you, brother. Julia and Mark. Mark's got the Vulcan thing too, Javi. This is not a Vulcan club, just in case you guys are wondering. I mean, I want you to live long and prosper and everything. But Sonia, Daisy, Linda, Ingrid, good to see everyone. Look at Lindsay's smile. Look at Lindsay smiling. Evelyn's here. Hey, Evelyn. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to have a conversation today about chapter 3 from the original text of Think and Grow Rich. In other texts, they move some chapters around and all this because, as you noticed, when you started reading this chapter, you started referring to studying the principles in other chapters that came later. Well, that's fine. We're going to read it exactly the way it originally came out of his brain. Okay, because all of these different principles are interrelated. You don't just get to pick and choose, right? In fact, once we get to the 13th principle, which is the sixth sense, he actually qualifies that as this is something you can use more once you've developed a bit of mastery with the other 12, right? So you don't get to just go and say, I'm going to go be a psychic or something. Although there are people who do that commercially, of course, right? There's money in that if you can get some money out of people for being their psychic friend or whatever. But that's not what we're interested in doing, except maybe our own friend. And with that being said, I'm going to open it up for discussion before I share screen and we take a look at what I highlighted on the text and we dig into this. Any thoughts on this profound chapter on faith that you'd like to share? Lines are open. You can come on out. Thoughts on what you just read with the chapter on faith, which of course also includes
John, I'll go first.
Ivia, yes, please.
For me, it was amazing that Schwab had that idea in his mind, and he was literally Carnegie's Man Friday. So not part of his senior leadership team or direct reports or, not even personal assistant. I mean, executive assistant or whatever, other term, you want to give him. He was just a regular guy, but he had this idea, and that pretty much catapulted him to being the CEO of this realized entity that Morgan bought into and everybody else backed up, and these millions came out of. And it just struck me that you don't really have to have the pedigree and the letters after your name and the right background and if you just believe long enough and you hold on to it and you just don't let it go, it can be what makes you stand before royalty and actually hold your own. Yeah, so that was probably one of the first few things, even though it was further on in the chapter. That struck me.
They kind of brought the chapter in for a landing with the whole story of how Charles Schwab, the Charles Schwab, who we all know now. I mean, they named companies after the guy, but how he put that combination together. And Carnegie and Morgan didn't even like each other.
No,
right?
Yeah.
So, and for those wondering about the term Man Friday, that is a reference from the book Robinson Crusoe, written in 1719, where I guess Crusoe's right-hand man or his assistant or whatever he called it, my Man Friday. Okay, so that's where that comes from. A little bit antiquated, but that's where that's from. Anybody else? I see Stuart's got his hand up. Stuart, you got a thought about this?
Of course, I have a thought about this, or several. I'm not used to you opening the floor up before the discussion, right? So I've got a lot of stuff I can say kind of after we go through this. But I think the really big takeaway for me from this chapter was the self-confidence formula and the five steps, knowing that you have the ability to achieve the object of your definite purpose. I thought that was really cool. And demand of yourself persistent, continuous action. I think that's kind of what we were talking about today, about how much energy it really takes to manifest the object that you desire, right? In terms of thought, energy, and then actual acting on things. The second one was like acting as if, meaning thinking about the person you want to be for 30 minutes a day, auto suggestion, affirmations, put your chief goal in writing. And then the last one was engage in no transaction that does not benefit all whom it affects. And I think that's a really important takeaway for me. But yeah, there's lots of good stuff in here. So I'm looking forward to hearing it, John.
That is huge. Wow, wow, wow. And I've referred to that often, that last one you just quoted. That is what a great, I think it's something we can wear as a feather in our cap if we feel like we've also made that decision for ourselves to play win-win. In other words, to not win at the expense of others. And I've had to introspect on that. You know, I've looked at that and I've thought, you know, is that, do I feel good and right about what I'm putting out into the marketplace?
Well, John, isn't that the integrity factor in this?
It is. It is. It's such a huge factor, and I think it often goes overlooked. Or perhaps people think, well, that's nice, you know, in theory, but in the real world of dog eat dog, rat race, you know, fill in metaphor here, it's, you know, do whatever you got to do, right? Ethics go out the window, or people might assume ethics go out the window, but there's no free rides, right? And the whole idea of connectedness, not to get too lofty or anything here, but you can't give anything away, whether it's of goodwill or you know, malice. You can't give anything away, right? It always comes back. So an interesting consideration. How am I showing up here? Because I think Glenn helped us quote the other day, that which you mete out will be mete back unto you, you know, 10 times, pressed down, running over, something. I'm paraphrasing now. A different use of the word meat, spelled differently as well. Thank you. Anybody else before we dig in?
Yeah, I just wanted to remark on how much time it actually takes. I had never read this section of the book before, when he's saying, I will concentrate my thoughts for 30 minutes daily. And then the next one is, I will devote 10 minutes daily. I have not devoted that kind of time to thinking about all of this. I just kind of incorporate it into my life and expect things to happen. So that will be an interesting exercise to see how much difference that makes.
Ah, yeah. Well, you know, Julia, we have tomorrow morning, in fact, tomorrow morning here in the States, tomorrow evening in the UK, we have a group intention, group meditation thing that goes on for about a half hour. And that is also by design. And it could take lots of different forms. We could talk more about that here in a little bit. Thank you for quantifying, right? Here's actual effort that we're going to put in deliberately, knowingly, not being distracted, right? And have I done that perfectly? No, I haven't. Well, I guess it comes down to the question, how bad do you want it? Glenn, how bad do you want it? Tell us what's coming up for you.
I want it bad, man. I was struck in this chapter on faith how often and how strongly Hill emphasizes the point that thoughts alone are not enough. Thinking about what we desire is not enough. It's got to be mixed, blended with emotion, thoughts that are mixed with any of the feelings of emotions. And that makes the thoughts magnetic, because that's how the universe is designed. The ethereal stuff has a magnetic charge, as he's saying. And when I mix a very clear vision of what I desire with emotional content, then I am now literally bringing towards me the material, the ethereal stuff of the universe in the attainment, in aid of the attainment of that which I desire. So it's not enough just to think about it, right? As you read the 6 steps, the 6th step, as you read, see and believe and feel yourself already in possession of the money. So I'm actually going to live, you know, people joke, how you doing? Living the dream. Well, yeah, live the dream and thus bring the dream closer to me. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Glenn. Mark, what thinks you? And then we'll go to Adrian.
Well, John, I saw an alignment here with this, with regard to James Allen and kind of his approach on the garden, and how he's cultivating and the subconscious, and how it can go either to the positive or the negative. And I like his use of those 4 steps with, where men abhor, then they endure, then they accept, then they act upon. So something that might have started out as something they didn't agree with, they can actually end up participating in, and it's all because of their subconscious and the way they act, or how they repetitiously, tell themselves that that this is okay. It's that whole thing about repetition. Sooner or later, you can say something is bad, and it becomes that, or vice versa. That whole.
Yeah, good stuff, which also lends itself to what Julia was talking about, is quantity, right? So does that half hour or that 10 minutes, does that have to be like a big ceremony or something? Well, I suppose at first it may be if we haven't gotten into a habit, but once we're in a habit, what's that line from Paul, from the Bible? Pray without ceasing. So when am I not doing that, right? And again, that sounds really like perfection, okay, which I haven't attained, but yeah, we could get to a point where our faith is that consistent, that powerful, and the doingness of it is that consistent, right? Because this isn't, here's the thing, and then we're going to go to Adrian and then Wayne. We could talk about the concept of a hammer, and you may have a hammer in your toolbox, but if you've never used a hammer, then it's just some abstract thing, right? We can force, pieces of metal into wood, and we can, there's this idea of hammering stuff. Not that I ever hammer stuff. I mean, I've got a hammer. Of course, we've all got a hammer, right? I mean, you got to keep up with the Joneses, right? I showed up, they showed up, we all got hammers, right? None of us have ever used them. It sounds silly. And yet, when we're talking about faith, I think that's kind of appropriate. What do you think, Adrian? What came up for you in this chapter?
Oh, so many things, John, but I wanted to focus on one aspect, which I know my friend Stuart will definitely share, and I think both of us want to talk about at some point. Effectively, we know this works, but we still don't scientifically understand why, but there is definitely science behind this, and it takes us into the realms of quantum physics. That is for sure. And we will understand more in the future about why this works, but it does. And we've effectively got a quantum physics hammer. So what we're thinking in terms of producing the vibrations he refers to magnetism, he refers to translation to the physical, that is absolutely aligned with what we now know about quantum physics, which is a fascinating area, i.e. how do we really relate to the world in these subatomic particles, which we're entirely made up of. And if we had the right optics, we could see right through ourselves at the sort of nano micro level. So this, we are connected in, and what we think really does vibrate and really does connect. And I know Stuart is planning to talk about this at some point, and I was thinking of talking about it as well. But that was just one of my thoughts, that there are so many things in this chapter again. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Yeah, there's been plenty written after this book about more the scientific, not only the scientific application of prayer, right, and faith and things like that. But then, of course, you can go down those rabbit holes with, quantum physics and such. So thank you. And then we're going to go to Wayne. Hey, Wayne, you got a thought about this? Where's Wayne, our metaphorical
Hey,
master?
John. Yeah. No, I really like this. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Have you got me there?
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay, sorry. Yeah. No, good. Sorry. I just got a quick little internet unstable message there, so something glitched. And yeah, Adrian, don't get me going there. That's a rabbit hole, all right. Something good to talk about. So the thing I really liked here was kind of the concept of, well, there's the self-confidence formula. Stuart mentioned that already, but just the formula or the recipe part of this faith and how faith mixes into that, and maybe it's the binding agent, really. But that little piece, and Ivier mentioned Charles Schwab there, but it speaks of his idea that came from imagination, and then faith mixing with the idea that he then put a plan into action and had persistence, made decision, all based on his burning desire. So just all those elements coming together. And I think faith being the binding element, of all those elements as they come together and bring things to fruition. So, you know, I think you can take the science part of that if you like, and just making faith the catalyst that starts the reaction, gets that reaction going, and sustains the reaction.
Well, as we're going to see, Wayne, in a subsequent chapter, the keystone of the philosophy he alludes to in this chapter, he already alluded to it a couple of times, and that is autosuggestion. So if there was a catalyst or a catalyzer, it could be that. But part of the byproduct of that, as he mentioned in this chapter, is that you can have faith. In fact, this is the only way to induce faith willfully, is through the practice of autosuggestion. That idea of praying without ceasing. So this whole thing becomes a really interconnected ball of principles. I'm really excited to see where this goes. Yeah, go ahead, Wayne. I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk over you. We've got a bit of a delay. Go ahead.
No, I guess that's sort of where I was meaning. It's just all those pieces, like no one thing stands on its own. And you're right, the autosuggestion piece, he speaks about a lot in this chapter, bring that faith to fruition. I think, to me, there's a part of the faith piece, though. I mean, I've had things happen to me with faith that I haven't necessarily used autosuggestion to stimulate that faith. The faith has occurred independently or separately, in my perspective. So I think faith is the major element. And certainly, you know, he speaks of the people here, where is it back here, about people believing that they're doomed to poverty and failure, etc. And then, of course, that one definition that he's got here, that faith is the only known antidote to failure. And so people believing that they've got failure, but not everybody believes that they fail in every fashion. Some people succeed vastly in one area of their life, and the other part of their life might be in shambles. So depending on what they believe and what part of their life, right? So I personally think, for me, faith, certainly in certain aspects, can be built from an autosuggestion point of view. And that's the important catalyst from that point of view. But faith has been the catalyst in other parts of my life that I haven't necessarily had to dwell a lot on. It's just there. So,
well, let me ask you about that. Because if there are things that you've noticed in your life where you developed, let's just call it a high dose of self-belief or a knowingness, right? And yet autosuggestion was not deliberately used, or you're not attributing any action, you know, there that happened, and yet you have faith nonetheless in yourself, your ability to succeed. Could you give us an example of some way that you've experienced faith in this way without deliberately saying, I'm going to go, you know, decide on some thoughts and sell them to myself repeatedly?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, certain aspects of my career, I've just had faith that I'm going to go do that. I haven't thought and said, okay, this is, I'm going to succeed at that. I've just succeeded at that just because there was an unknowing at some stage belief. Whereas if I think of the financial aspect.
Poof, Wayne's gone. Okay. If he thinks of the financial aspect and then he was struck by lightning. We'll get Wayne back here in just a second. Let's go to Ivier and Adrian have their hands up again. Go ahead, Ivier, you've got the floor.
John, I think that the other thing that struck me that I remembered now that I had to actually reread to make sure I read right was that thoughts were powerful, whether in a positive direction or in a negative direction. So it almost seemed like faith could work for you regardless of which way you thought. So the gentleman they found in the hotel room that had repeated to himself, you know, he couldn't stand the shame, this was going to kill him. And they found his dead body in the room a few days later because he'd taken some money from the company and had gambled it away. You know, and I just thought, it's amazing. So if this thought thing and the emotions we attach to it and then meshing all of that together with faith is that powerful that negative thoughts can become a reality, it's like, why would we even want to spend another waking moment on the negative side of things? Just channel all that energy to the positive side and just experience more of that kind of energy as opposed to, yeah, I mean, that for me just, I mean, I literally had to read that over and over and over again to just make sure I hadn't missed something. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Are you actually asking why? Like, why would people do that?
Well, now that we know, I mean, don't people know this? I mean, like,
no. To know and not to do is not to know. And I on the scale of knowing this, I haven't reached the summit either.
No, but yeah.
But I would say if I was going to give you something, and this isn't just accusatory, because if I point the finger 3 point back, but it's easy to grow weeds in the garden. You could be total lazy.
Yeah.
You could be half an idiot and be negative, right? And you get a lot of agreement. We could be really social about that, and we could bitch and gripe about all our problems, right? And so that's why it's very seductive. Yeah, the dark side, so to speak.
Yeah.
The dark side of the force.
Yeah, I just couldn't believe that guy literally died from telling himself that over and over and over in less than 3 days.
Yeah.
That was shocking. Yeah.
Can I jump in on that one, John? I was just going to make a very similar point, and
yeah.
the reason I'm saying it now is that I'd heard of this case before, and someone on the calls, I think it was Kathy, raised it about 3 or 4 weeks back. There is actually a true story about a guy that got locked in a container lorry, a freezer truck. He believed it was operational, and he froze to death. He was found dead in the lorry, albeit that it wasn't actually, the freezer wasn't connected.
It wasn't on.
He convinced himself through negative thought and faith in those negative thoughts that he was going to die, and he did. But it wasn't actually operational. It's a true story.
Mm-hmm.
So that just, again, it proves the positive case again, that the negative case
does
exist, proves the positive. Yeah.
Right. And I think the temperature never got below 40 degrees Fahrenheit or something, which still feels cold.
Yeah, but
right?
he wasn't in any danger, but he died.
Right. So I think, here's a modern term, comorbidity, right? So I think that wasn't the cold that killed him, but perhaps the guy was on a downward spiral to begin with, because someone with a drive to survive and get out of a situation, will to live, right? Call it whatever you want. They're not going to succumb. So if someone's already on a downward spiral of succumbing, this is a big big topic we can get into. It's been written at great lengths by guys like L. Ron Hubbard, right? Huge books on this, where we're either moving towards growth and survival, or succumb and death, and more on like the science of how this whole thing works in our minds. Huge topic, but I would have to argue without knowing the guy. But my immediate thought is this guy wanted to die. I mean, if any of you were locked in that train car or lorry or whatever it was, and it was 40 degrees Fahrenheit in there, and you had kids to go home to, and mouths to feed and purposes to fulfill in life, is that it? I'm cashing in. It's a little cold in here. I think that's it for me. Probably not, right? So there was a so-called comorbidity in there. Thank you, Adrian. Wow, we're 23 minutes in. We haven't even opened the book. But you guys all read it already, so that's great. Maybe we won't even look at the book. Stuart, you got another thought on this?
I got a couple of thoughts. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry about that. Oops. All right, good. One is I immediately think of James Allen with that story that you just told, and his quote about how negative thoughts have surely or will kill a man as surely as a bullet, for paraphrasing. And I just wanted to finish Wayne's thought or answer his question that you gave him in terms of an example of faith without convincing ourselves or auto-suggestion. And I would even, from what I know about Ivier, I bet you she would say the same thing. And that there's a certain level of trust that we can build in terms of our relationship with the universe. And this even touches on what Glenn is saying, that once you understand that the universe or, the particles, surrounding us, they all conspire to work with us to help us create the picture in our minds that we're thinking of. On a personal level, when I left home and I crash landed here in New Mexico, and I really had absolutely nothing, I remember going out and collecting firewood on a daily basis just to be able to throw in the wood stove and keep the fire going and keep my kid warm. Absolutely no resources. Where's my next meal going to come from? How am I going to pay my bills or whatever it is. And I think there's a certain level of trust that we can place in the bridge of incidents, let's say, or just things working out, whatever the words are that we want to use for that. But once we kind of engage in that, and once that is reinforced to us that you're always going to be okay, there's always going to be food on the table, there's always going to be a roof over your head, and there's a certain reassurance and trust in that. And so the next time you're in a situation that could be a really stressful situation, it's already been proven to me. And so I don't need to convince myself of those things. And so I think while auto-suggestion and affirmation is a powerful, powerful tool, I think there's a certain level of faith that can come from experience, just from having things work out in your life. And I don't want to take up too much time, and I'll let you jump back on, John.
We do have Wayne back. Wayne, you were talking about the financial ramifications of faith without having to deliberately choose thoughts about it, or something you were about to talk about. Wayne, if you want to reclaim the floor. Wayne, no go on Wayne.
Oh, here we go. Can you hear?
Yeah,
can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess where I was kind of going with that is, you know, for me, there's certain things that have occurred in my life where, you know, I haven't had to think about some things with my kids and so on, and just where there was a knowingness without having to think about it. And yet, you know, when I look at the financial side, I guess there's that faith piece that came from my grandparents being sort of survivalists of the depression, and, you know, just making do on the farm, and then my parents going bankrupt on the farm when I was in my late teens and so on. And there's sort of that pattern, right? So in a way, there's a belief that you will survive but not necessarily prosper, that's sort of conditioned there. So that one for me is going to require autosuggestion, right, to overcome that belief system, or in order to have that faith for something greater than I experienced there. But for those other things, you know, there's an example with when my wife was pregnant with my twins, and where things were going to turn out with the pregnancy and those sorts of things, that there was a faith that I had, now granted somewhat out of my control, but there was a knowingness that occurred in me as to what the outcome was going to be, without sitting there each day, you know, having an affirmation or going through some sort of process to say, this is going to work. So I think personally, in my experience, that there's certain times in my life where there has been a faith in something, and sometimes it's much bigger than me, that I don't even necessarily have direct control on, but that knowingness of a positive outcome that has been proven to me in some different circumstances, and you know, that one with my kids in particular, and other experiences with them past that. So there's sort of, I guess there's the two pieces to that. There's, and I don't even know how to put it in words, to be honest with you. So.
Very good. So it works whether you're thinking about it or not, which I think is a great point, which is why I wanted to kind of dig a little bit more on that. I've got a couple examples of faith in my life without having to fashion, you know, some sort of a specific statement about something too. In fact, we all do. I can give you a couple examples of that, like Wayne was just doing. Anybody else before we dig into the book? Anybody else? Okay. So, in fact, here's one example of it right now. Okay. So I was born and I started walking around on the planet, and I didn't fall off into space. And so there's this gravity thing, right? When I think about the term auto-suggestion, right? Auto meaning self-suggestion. It could also mean automatic suggestion. So here is this thing, this physical universe thing that I'm participating in, obviously. And I've got a constant reminder saying, this is real, this is real, this is real. Now, I didn't have to think about, is gravity real? Well, let's argue about gravity, right? Can we have a debate team, please? No, none of that, right? I got sold that over and over and over, constantly selling that idea to myself, experiencing the reality of it, which kind of lends itself to, because as Ivier was talking about, this is a loaded gun, right? I mean, it's good, it's bad, I don't know, but it's going to work either way, for good or for bad, okay? Do I think now, like The Matrix, right? You guys remember the movie The Matrix? which was 1999. Can you believe that movie's that old? The Matrix was 1999. But there's this reality, right? So what Morpheus says to Neo, so what is real, right? Just electrical, interpretations by your brain. What is real? What are you talking about real? So in our lives, can we not have things that are not true still occur as real as gravity for us? Yes, 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 every single day. And people run programs, myself, right? Sometimes that don't serve us, and it seems just as real as gravity. So I think that's where we're going with this. Auto-suggestion is the tool that, let me go ahead and share my screen. And I really hope that we're still live and recording this, because I just saw an error on YouTube. Hopefully that is running, because I'm not doing a backup recording here. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. For those of you, if you are seeing this on recording, then it worked. And if you're not, then it didn't. But here's the chapter right out of the gate, opening paragraph. Faith is the head chemist of the mind. When faith is blended with the vibration of thought, the subconscious mind instantly picks up the vibration, translates it into its spiritual equivalent, and transmits it to infinite intelligence, as in the case of prayer. So this is a huge one-sentence paragraph that I think sets the stage for the whole thing, and we all just talked about it. Blended with the vibration of thought. What vibration are we talking about? Is it a positive vibration, a negative vibration? Later in the chapter, he talks about how, radio waves have helped us to understand this, right? Do you like this music? Maybe, maybe not. Well, how about that music, right? So these are different vibrations of thought. Doesn't matter which one we're tuned into, right? Well, it matters in terms of our results, but it works either way. The subconscious mind, in other words, that which we're not thinking about, instantly picks up the vibration, because now we just charged it, like Glenn was saying. This is now potent. It's not just some words on paper or just some thinkingness that occurred, right? It's now charged with emotion, right? So movement is happening now. This is being transmitted and being translated into its spiritual equivalent. He talks about some of these emotions here, emotions of faith, love, and sex. This one would be more genetic, bodily, biological. Faith and love, psychic. Where's the word psychic come from? The spirit, study of the spirit. And that word has evolved into now study of the mind and spirit. And materialists have reduced it to just study of the mind. Okay, so psychology. But psyche is the spirit. That's where that word comes from. So when we say spiritual equivalent, we're just talking about unseen, which we could say body and mind. If we're just a body walking around, well, then none of this works, right? There's got to be something behind the machine, as in like the Matrix kind of a thing, which was a thoughtful movie. Okay, and transmits it to infinite intelligence. In other words, we're not going to be limited anymore just by reason. Reason is nice and useful, but it's based on what we already know. Who already knows? Me, John, the limited guy who has this bodily experience, and I use 5 physical senses. I can hear, see, smell, taste, and touch, and that's it. Well, that doesn't make me any better than an amoeba or something, or I guess anything else that has 5 senses. But you get the point, right? Is that we're participating at a higher level of causation when we engage principles like this, because we've got the ability to do so, the consciousness to do so. And he'll talk a little bit later about the brain in the chapter, but it's not really so much the brain as it is our use of mind. There's a difference between brain, which is a piece of meat, and mind, which is an action, as in the case of prayer. So this one paragraph, just that he ends it with, as in the case of prayer, I think is important, because a lot of people immediately ascribe the word faith to some religious practice. And that's not what he's talking about in this book. You can be whatever religion you want. He even talks about Gandhi, right? So this isn't necessarily a Christian text, right? It's a living text. It's about how life works as observed by Napoleon Hill and all of us. Repetition of affirmation of orders to your subconscious mind is the only known method of voluntary development of the emotion of faith. Okay, so Wayne experienced and does experience faith, not voluntarily, okay, but just because he showed up and this reality exists and he's sold. Well, great. I'm sold too. Now, this brings up the question. If I believed and had faith that, the sky was red instead of blue, would it be so? We can get into metaphysical, arguments about this. My answer to that, or to go contrary to ostensible reality, my answer to that would be if the majority of us Earth dwellers had faith in that, we'd turn the sky red. Interesting argument. Probably not an experiment we can do, but not just, hey, everybody, let's do an experiment. It would be like constant spaced repetition. Like, really, we're sold that the sky's turning red. We are sold, right? You can't talk me out of it. Yeah, then I think we'd see a red sky. Actually, we got some fantastic sunsets here in Arizona, so I get to see a red sky all the time. How about you, Stuart? You got some sunsets over there in Taos, probably.
Oh, yeah, the sky's super red.
So good stuff there. Perhaps the meaning may be made clearer through the following explanation as to the way men sometimes become criminals, stated in the words of a famous criminologist. When men first come into contact with crime, they abhor it. Oh, if they remain in contact with crime for a time, they become accustomed to it and endure it. If they remain in contact with it long enough, they finally embrace it and become influenced by it. So we're talking about the transfer of a belief set or faith in some expected outcome through association, through environmental immersion, right? And do we not see this? I'm sure many of us can, and I've had some private conversations with some of us where you've cited, oh, look, that person has changed. That person has gone down a different road, right? Or how could they even believe that? How could they even, I ask myself this all the time, when I see irrational stuff going on in some of the social discourse. Really? Like, you really believe that? Wow. Well, guess what? Immersion. And we can use this for good or for bad. I've often said the fastest way to accelerate your own evolution into whatever successful thing you want to be, do, and have would be go immerse yourself in the environment where that is a reality, not just a theory, but a reality. If you want to learn Japanese, go move to Tokyo or something. You're going to be speaking Japanese really good, really fast. Okay. Or you could just sit here, read a book on Japanese. 10 years later, you'll know a few phrases. Meh, whatever. Meh. That's the result you get. You get a meh, right? Or you move to Tokyo. You get it done right. You see the difference? Big difference. So that is an auto-suggestion type experience. I'm walking around the streets of Tokyo and we're all eating, fish heads and rice. And we are talking Japanese, man, right? Not in theory, for real. No force needed, by the way. I didn't have to force myself. All right. In connection with this, consider again the statement, all thoughts which have been emotionalized, all given feeling and mixed with faith begin immediately to translate themselves into the physical equivalent or counterpart, whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, whether you prefer it or not. So this is the double-edged sword. You will understand that the subconscious mind will translate into its physical equivalent a thought impulse of a negative or destructive nature just as readily as it will act upon thought impulses of a positive or constructive nature. So thank you, Olivier, for zeroing in on that, because that's big, right? That now screams who's responsible. Hopefully someone who's willing to do the work. And he mentioned again his son Blair, to make this deceit more realistic, conduct yourself just as you would if you were already in possession of the material thing which you are demanding when you call upon your subconscious mind. So yeah, we're telling ourselves a lie at first. Okay. But guess what? We find evidence. We find evidences, plural, of that thing which we believe or want to believe. Anyone ever heard of something called confirmation bias? Right? Where we've got an assumption about something and we start to pull in evidence to support our bias towards that's, what I would like. It works. And we could do that to our own detriment, or we could do it very resourcefully, or some combination of the two. I think we're all somewhere in that continuum. Perfection will come through practice. It cannot come by merely reading instructions. So I'm still practicing. I'll tell you about the perfection as soon as I have attained it. Not there yet. This is something that Wayne mentioned. Faith is the only known antidote for failure. So in the previous chapter, he talked about once you've got the definiteness of desire, and you start implementing those 6 steps, like Glenn was reminding us, you don't submit to failure anymore. You don't submit to it. Does that mean that you always hit the mark? No, of course not. Okay, but the faith that you will hit the mark is the antidote for failure. It's a well-known fact that one comes finally to believe whatever one repeats to oneself, whether the statement be true or false. So we kind of already covered that. Thoughts which a man deliberately places in his own mind and encourages with sympathy, harmonious vibration, not sympathy, oh, I feel so sorry for you. So again, this is 1936. Okay, so sympathetic, harmonious, right, and sympathy, and which he mixes with any one or more of the emotions constitute the motivating forces which direct and control every movement, act, and deed. So another book that was written, a contemporary of Napoleon Hill, written around the same time, was Psycho-Cybernetics, where Maxwell Maltz, who was a plastic surgeon, he noticed that people would have either spectacular transformations, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, or no transformation at all, after having changed the disfigurement or the cosmetics or whatever it happened to be. But that they have, and that we all have, a program that we're running, which he called a cybernetic mechanism, likened to an autopilot on a plane or a thermostat in your house. And it's near impossible to outperform or underperform your self-image. So if you believe, you're just, you only make 200,000 a year or 50,000 a year, or just $1 million a year, or whatever the number is, just to put it in financial terms, right? If that's your self-image, is that you earn that much money, no matter what, even if you had like this big windfall, right? You'll finish the year right around the same place where you finished it last year. You'll have this big win and then lose, right? Or if you're losing a whole lot, suddenly you'll pick it up. Circumstances will come your way to fulfill that innermost expectation about who you are and what you're here to accomplish. All right. So this is how we start to deliberately work on the autopilot, to change that program, to move the thermostat. Easy? No, not easy, because the appearances, the evidences, the circumstances are so seductive. I mean, after all, look, there it is. Look, there's gravity. I'm sold, right? It's a very easy sell. But thinking truth, regardless of appearances, is laborious. Takes a lot of effort. So here's the self-confidence formula. We could read the whole thing, but I think in some ways we already covered it. But I just want to put people's attention on this, because a lot of times people are thinking, well, how can I improve my confidence in whatever area of my life? Here's a formula you can use. It's a formula. There's other formulae too, but this is a formula that you can use. And one of the things that I like about this whole idea that autosuggestion is the only known method to voluntarily, induce faith for yourself. I like that, because we're going to get to autosuggestion. I think it's the next chapter. But I like that he's giving us a specific thing we can do, right? So a lot of us here are engaged in new forms of business where there's a lot of learning to go on. There's a lot of things that you could learn and could execute to get to the fruits, right? To get to the successful business. But sometimes, right, we're vague, right? Some of the instructions are ambiguous. Well, I'm not sure, which thing do I do first, or to what degree should I do the thing, right? Well, here, just in this chapter, right, we've got a formula for self-confidence. That's great. Or just with the whole initial instruction of, you want to have faith in your ability to succeed, practice autosuggestion, right? So here's one specific thing you can do. Now you don't have to sit around and ask yourself, what should I be doing? Here's the thing you should do. Do this. He's actually telling you what to do, which I love, right? But also notice, in this chapter, as in every chapter, this is one of the secrets in this book. He mentioned in the preface, there's a secret in this book. There's a few, okay? But there's a secret in this book. And if you get the secret, man, you're unstoppable. One of the secrets in this book, in my assessment, is that he keeps reassuring you, the reader, that yes, you can do this. Every chapter, he reassures you that yes, you can do this. And he gives you purports and examples and testimony. He's helping you induce faith in yourself just by reading the book. Brilliant, the way he wrote this. So I hope I didn't spoil the surprise for anybody, because it's really, I don't think it should be a surprise. But if you leave each chapter feeling edified and more able than you were before, well, the author did his job, right? Can you do that in the lives of other people? That's part of the secret. Can you do that in the lives of other people? You can, if you think about it. I mean, there's plenty of things we could be critical of. And in fact, we've had some conversations even here tonight about some of the misuse of faith and erroneous thought and the folly of man and, et cetera. But if that's where the conversation ends, are we part of the problem or part of the solution? Are we actually solving something? Are we lifting people up? Are we even lifting ourselves up? So I always seek, I shouldn't say always, okay, that's absolute, okay, but more often than not, I am asking, what part of the solution can I be in this person or these people's lives? I'm not setting myself up as the ideal, although, but think about that. Think what the author is doing to you right now. Think what he's selling you. He's selling you that you're powerful. That's what he's selling you. And he goes on. I'm going to rip through this. We're already 46 minutes in. Oh my goodness. So here we already allude to the emotion of love in the human heart and brain creates a favorable field of magnetic attraction, which causes an influx of the higher and finer vibrations, which are afloat in the ethers. Stuart, in the ethers. Okay. So this is something you can't do as a piece of meat. Okay. You do this as a triune being, body, mind, and spirit. Okay. This is big stuff where he's talking about civilization, right? These leaders will come from the rank and file of the unknown men who now labor in the steel plants, the coal mines, the automobile factories, and the small towns and cities of America. So he's predicting, which is easy to do, that change is going to happen, folks. Does that make him a soothsayer or something? No, it just means that his eyes are open. Yeah, there's change. That's a constant in the universe. Stuff is going to change. And people who right now are not recognized will be, because they see the sign of the times. And they have enough self-belief that when opportunity knocks, they reach. They don't just roll over and complain about the noise. They reach. And that can be you. We're going to get to the chapter on organized planning coming up here, and he really unloads on that one. All right, so here we're not going to get into the whole story. It's rather extensive, but he talks about how Schwab secured that deal with these two guys that didn't even like each other. Carnegie thought Morgan, all those Wall Street guys are scum. I don't want to deal with them. And yet here's the biggest deal that's ever been fashioned by one of those guys who emerged as Man Friday, right? And certainly made his mark. Here's the story about the dinner speech, right? Which people weren't even taking seriously, but now the whole damn world took it seriously. And everybody's got an opinion about it. And if you haven't read the book for yourself, read it. It's an interesting story. And I just highlighted this part here just to make sure people understood this philosophy was the warp and the woof of the entire transaction. So whoop and wharf has to do with weaving. It's the threads that go this way are the whoop, and the ones that go this way are the wharf. So just to make sure you understand the meaning of the words. Never go past words you don't understand. It's really important. Remember also that the man who created the United States Steel Corporation was practically unknown at the time. That was Charles Schwab. There are no limitations to the mind except those we acknowledge. Both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. And then we're going to hit it. We're going to go to the keystone of the philosophy next week. So I'm really excited about covering this. This is a short chapter, by the way, but if you've already read it, he tells you to read it every day until you've thoroughly sold it to yourself. Read it every day until you are 100% in with us on that deal, that auto-suggestion deal. So those are all the things that came up for me, which is pretty much everything that we already talked about. I'm hoping you got some additional food for action with all this, because like the metaphor I used earlier, the hammer, if we've never used the hammer, but we're, very happy that we have one in our toolbox and we can think about hammering sometimes, but we never really do it. Well, that's nice. You got a hammer. Who cares? Right? This is for use. This is for use. Is it easy? No, not necessarily. Well, yeah, with gravity and with things that were sort of realities that were handed to us, which are agreeable. Yeah, well, I'll buy that deal. That's easy. But if we're looking to evolve, if we're looking to deliberately cause increase in our lives and the lives of others, Yeah, we're going to work. We're going to work. Ivier, you've got the floor, and then anybody else before we wrap up.
So when he gave us, it was interesting that the Power of Consistency book by Weldon Long, he makes us write out our consistency outcomes and what actions we're going to take to achieve those. And in some sense, I tied that into that self-confidence formula, because I think it was point 4 of his formula that said, what's your definite chief aim in life? And so I put my consistency outcomes there as my chief aim. And it's just amazing that the Power of Consistency says 15 minutes just to meditate on those outcomes a day, but he's recommending 30 minutes in one place and 10 minutes in another. And so if you then add the 15 minutes, you're kind of like almost an hour. But I mean, it's easy. You can think about this. You can take regular breaks throughout the day and think about this. So I kind of like went through the steps and I wrote out my summary, well, I guess transaction paragraph that he said to do. And I signed my name and dated it. So, so it's just interesting. I'm like, this book has worked for people. So, okay, we're going to do this. And yeah, it's going to work for us. So.
Good stuff.
Yeah, that was my homework. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, when I first started practicing, you know, spiritual seeking and meditation and stuff, I was told, you know, if you can do an hour in the morning and an hour at night, that's great. Maybe start with less, right? But a half hour seems to be the magic spot. I would say 15 minutes bare minimum, right? You sit there and if you don't like the word meditate, all right, concentrate, right? So deliberate thought on one idea. And in fact, you're going to have lots of other ideas impinging. Okay. So it's not just like, you know, bam, I'm in and nothing else can get through. So this takes practice. But I think to deliberately choose a specific finite amount of time is good for our own, you know, discipline to sort of get us on that path. Thank you, my friend. Ingrid's got the floor. Hi, Ingrid. How are you? Where is Ingrid? Let's get her out here. Where is Ingrid? Ask her to unmute. Please unmute. Ingrid.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. You are in a sea of black. It must be pretty dark where you are.
It is because I'm driving and it's nighttime.
Ah. Yeah.
But I wanted to tell you something. I was just mentioning it to Adrian before the call. Because I listen to a lot of the books on Audible for, you know, because I'm always driving. And I have this book as well, but I went on Audible and I got this lecture series by Napoleon Hill where he talks about the 17 principles, and it's super cool. Like his voice and the way he speaks and his choice of language. It's not really like the book. I mean, it has the principles, but it's a really great listen if anyone is just curious. I really liked it.
Who was the orator?
That's
Napoleon Hill.
Oh, it's read by the author.
Yeah, it's read by him. It's totally cool.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's go right to the source.
What's it called? Like Lectures by Napoleon Hill or something like that. So check it out if you're a listener person.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, Ingrid, when you listen to Napoleon Hill, for those of you who haven't heard his voice, it's not like a deep voice or anything. It's kind of like not a mouse or anything, but not like a heavy hardcore voice. And then one of his students, Earl Nightingale, is like, boom, right? There's Earl Nightingale. And so they were very different in terms of their oratory, but the same philosophy. Yeah. So maybe that's why there is an Earl Nightingale, because there was a Napoleon Hill and their voices are very different. Thank you.
I like the choice of language. It's more abrupt. It's not like when he writes it. It's interesting. Just check it out. It's cool.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, I've heard Napoleon Hill. So
okay, so you know the phrasing. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. I'm quite familiar with it. Yeah, but maybe drop a link. Maybe drop a link in our Facebook group to whatever resource you're referring to, so we could all check that out as well.
Yeah, it's on Audible. I think I'll do it later when I'm not driving. But hey, yeah.
Oh no, right now.
Yeah,
right. All right, let's go to. Thank you. You drive safe, my friend. We'll go to Wayne, then Stuart. Hey, Wayne.
Hey, yeah, good, John. Yeah, so it's interesting because you mentioned Japan, and you've mentioned it before. If you want to learn the language, go to Japan and immerse yourself in it. And it reminded me of a guy I met in Japan, actually. And just this thought again of all of these elements being sort of part of a greater whole. Like no one of these elements standing on its own, and faith being that. We talked about desire last week, but it just made what you were talking about. I met this guy. He was part of the American occupation force in Japan at the end of the Second World War, and he met and married a Japanese woman, and he lived in Japan. I met him in the 90s, and he didn't speak Japanese. And I believe that he believed he could learn to speak Japanese, but he had no desire to learn to speak Japanese. So he lived in the country, but never learned the language. So it just, those elements, it just made me think of him and those elements, that he was living in a place, but very awkwardly, really, because he wasn't willing to employ the different principles as a whole. So, I think we learn desire, and maybe Napoleon Hill put it in the order that he put it in for whatever reason. Desire first, faith next, and then there's all the other elements that are going to follow here. But yeah, I just thought that came to mind when you were mentioning that.
Thank you. Yeah, we could certainly resist. Right. I mean, some things you can't, like gravity, right? But, you want to learn Japanese? I guess you're not going to learn it. There's plenty of opportunity, though. You're on easy street if you want it.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, as I said, I think he probably believed he could do it. He just had no desire. And so you need all those pieces need to be part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like me with golf. Yeah. What do you think, Stuart?
Anything the mind can conceive, the mind can achieve.
Napoleon Hill. Is Napoleon Hill resurrected?
You need a definite sense of purpose and take deliberate action. Oh my God. No, I love it. So yeah, I want to echo what Ingrid was saying there. And honestly, it's all on YouTube. I just put that link in there. And yeah, I want to say, even before I read any of the written material, I listened to those lectures, which are essentially, it's not that he's reading the book, he's summarizing each of the principles at like one of the early self-help conventions or whatever. So he's speaking before a group of insurance salesmen or a group of salesmen or whatever it is, and he's doing these lectures. So they're super awesome. And I want to say that was my first introduction to Napoleon Hill, and I really loved it. So yeah, anybody that has a chance to listen to that, and it's free on YouTube, and those are great. Echoing what Ivier is saying, and you as well, John, that at least in this chapter, he's giving us some things to do, right? And we can conceptualize and theorize and talk about how great all that stuff is, but I really do like the fact that he's giving us like a homework list, right? And so those 5 steps, right? Spend a half hour a day, working on your, seeing yourself having already achieved your goal and already having the object of your desire. And then what Glenn was talking about earlier about this emoting and feeling it, because feeling is sort of the missing ingredient that supercharges our thoughts to really mobilize the molecular universe around us to complete the picture. And then the 10 minutes of affirmations and positive self-talk. And then even with the, what I'll call the assumptive state, which is the step 1 in that, self-confidence formula is, think of yourself having already done that and feel it. And of course, Goddard talks a lot about that, and that's what he calls the law of assumption. This, again, I said it today, even this morning on call, this concept of creating congruence between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind, because if our subconscious mind is really the creator and we need to convince the creative aspect of our mind, right, then we can do that through affirmation. We can do that through assumption. And again, that's internal assumption versus external assumption. I'm always really clear on that. And your talk today about expectations plays right into that. I loved your quotes on the Matrix, and it makes me think about, and everybody's quotes that they put that in there in the chat, I thought were really cool. I love the Matrix quotes. but it speaks to the holographic nature of the universe. And if anybody hasn't heard of that, we can do a session on that one time, sort of the as above, so below. And let's call it the other thing that if you want to talk about like quantum physics, we can talk about the simulation theory, which essentially says that reality is like the matrix. It's what our brain encodes from the 5 sensory data. Super fascinating stuff to me. What I prefer along those lines is the self-simulation theory, which is really this concept of we can create our external reality by our thoughts. And I love what he said about the magnetic force. What did he say? Whether it's true or not, our thoughts are mixed with emotions and create this magnetic force which attracts the ether, the vibrations of reality, right? And I got a couple things to say about that, but I don't want to dive too deep because it's actually something that Adrian mentioned that I want to talk about at some point on either a general session or something else. But you mentioned something, the brain is different than the mind, right? And so the brain is the tool, right? It's the machine, it's the organ, right? Mind is the function. It's actually what the brain does, right? And so we can say the brain is a hunk of meat, but it's really the mind that we're talking about when we're talking about action and doing, right? And thinking. I don't know if you guys know this, and I know we're at 8:01, so I'll just be quick. But the brain, when you think, right? If you hook up an EEG to your brain, that you're essentially putting out brain waves. Your brain has magnetite crystals, and it's just been found in the last 20 years that the magnetite in the human brain collects itself in certain areas like the amygdala and the brainstem and the cerebellum. And what happens when you actually think something, when you think a thought, your brain is a transmitter. It's also a receiver, but your brain is a transmitter. And literally when you think of something, that thought is a wave. And it doesn't just bounce around inside our heads. It goes out into the universe, right? So this is sort of how thoughts are things and how we actually are cause. And then the other thing I'll mention is he talks about the emoting in the heart, right? And I don't know if you guys know this, but the brain has an electromagnetic field, right? The heart has an electromagnetic field that is 5 times more powerful than the electric field in your brain. And it extends about 5 feet out from your body. And it's real science, right? And what I think is really cool is that your heart has more receptors from the brain than your brain has receptors from the heart, right? So when we think and we feel things, we are actually creating changes in our own body's magnetic field, right? And then we can get into talking about like resonance and how our magnetic field affects other people's magnetic field, or just absolutely affects the vibratory state of all the matter around us, right? So this is something we can get way into. I'm so into it, and we'll get into it. But yeah, thoughts are things, and the heart, changes the world around us.
Thank you, Stuart. This is beautiful. Thank you all for participating with us here tonight. This is, I think, important work that we're doing, not only in our own lives, but like Stuart just reminded us, right? How does that affect everyone we touch? So yeah, I choose to be part of the solution to the best of my ability. And I think we're all on that same path. I think we're going to wrap up with that. I don't see any other hands. Everyone good. We're going to get into a brief but very important chapter, autosuggestion. So we'll be back here next week. If you're seeing this, hopefully you're seeing this on recording as well, because hopefully it's being recorded. And if you can join us live next time, it's going to be great, because I think we want to share. I'd like to hear a few affirmations, ideas, word tracks, whatever works for you. Perhaps next week we could talk about that and actually see how we're using these first few principles to bring that definite desire closer to us. So again, that's it for tonight. Thank you again. I will see you guys real soon. Thank you, Glenn, for quoting me. Have a good one. Bye for now.
Bye.